J.W. Williams Funeral Directors have been proudly serving the people of this community since 1918. Service is our motto. The poor, the rich, the middle class, and all are given the best of care and attention at all times. You have the privilege to select what you want. In your time of need, contact the capable, the competent, and the dependable staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home who is genuinely concerned with your care. At J.W. Williams Funeral Home, you are aptly served by the proprietor president, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, who continues the traditions and values set forth by the past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. Your announcers for the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Sunday morning program are Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Reverend Isaac H. Owens, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, Minister Frankie Harmon, Miss Sandra Johnson, and Deacon Earl Clark, Jr.
Thank you, and good morning, friends. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be brighter after listening to our program. The family of Deacon Johnny Lee Little, Sr. of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mother Lee Otis Bryant Butt of Leesburg, Georgia. The family of United States Army veteran Mr. Jerry Omar Brown of Albany, Georgia. The family of Mr. Samuel James Maynard of Cordele, Georgia. The family of the Reverend Charlie James Anderson Sr. of Unadilla, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for the food, the flowers, the condolences, and all other expressions of sympathy and kindness shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. Mr. Monte K. Reed Jr., age 26, of 2124 Doris Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Monday, February 6th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Monte K. Reed Jr., age 26, was held Sunday, February 12th in the sanctuary of the Shady Grove Baptist Church in Cordele, Georgia. The pastor, the Reverend Kelvin Drake, officiated. Burial followed at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted mother, Mrs. and her husband, Mr. Willie, Bill, Georgia, his beloved and caring father, Mr. Monte K. Reed Sr., and his wife, Mrs. Kedra Reed of Cordele, Georgia, his loving sisters, Miss Shanteria Dean and her husband, Mr. Dan Dean, Miss Mustasia Aid Reed, both of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved brothers, Mr. Dequan Thomas of Warner Robins, Georgia, and Mr. Devon Smothers of Cordele, Georgia. His loving and devoted grandparents, Mrs. Annie Peterson, Miss Cassandra Reed, and Mr. Leon Walker, all of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved great-grandmother, Mrs. Pearl Reed of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved aunts and uncles, Miss Shavita Barner and her husband, Jerry Barner, Miss Rebecca Walker, and Mr. Marlon Reed, all of Cordele, Georgia. Mrs. Jennifer Anderson and her husband Troy Anderson of Tampa, Florida. Mr. Greg Peterson and his wife, Miss Tracy Peterson of Vienna, Georgia. And Mr. Derek Peterson and his wife, Mrs. Musselin Peterson of Goose Creek, South Carolina. His beloved great aunts and great uncles, Miss Maydie Clark, Miss Zelda McGriff and her husband, Mr. Butch McGriff, Miss Margie Kears and her husband, Mr. Roger Kears, all of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Debbie Reed of Atlanta, Georgia. His beloved nieces and nephews, a host of cousins, other relatives, and a special friend, Miss Canasia Johnson of Cordele, Georgia, survived Mr. Monte K. Reed Jr., age 26, of 2124 Doris Street, Cordele, Georgia. Deacon Johnny Lee Little, Sr., age 85, of 197 Old Dawson Road, Americus, Georgia, died Thursday, February 9th at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for Deacon Johnny Lee Little, Sr., age 85, was held Tuesday, February 14th, in the sanctuary of the Lebanon Baptist Church in Plains, Georgia. The pastor, Reverend Christopher O'Brien, officiated. His pastor, the Reverend O. Quintard Bryant, pastor of the Bethlehem Baptist Church of Plains, Georgia, delivered the eulogy. The burial followed at Staley Memorial Garden in Americus, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife of 67 years, Mrs. Ruby May Hicks Little of Americus, Georgia. His loving and devoted children, Mr. Johnny Little and his wife, Mrs. Bobby Little of Americus, Georgia. Mr. Melvin Little and his wife, Mrs. Gail Little of Valdosta, Georgia. Mr. Curtis Little of Americus, Georgia, and Mrs. Renee Little Waters and her husband, Mr. Jeff Waters of St. John, Florida. 11 beloved grandchildren, 23 great-grandchildren, his loving and caring sisters, Miss Mary Rouse, Miss Earlene Brown, Mrs. Elaine Baker and her husband, Mr. Fonzo Baker, and Mrs. Gloria Jones and her husband, Mr. James Jones, all of Americus, Georgia. Mrs. Anna Broner and her husband, Mr. Lester Broner of Kennesaw, Georgia, and Mrs. Connie Kitchen and her husband, Mr. Rufus Kitchen of Stockbridge, Georgia. A beloved brother, Mr. James Little Sr. of Americus, Georgia. A host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Deacon Johnny Lee Little Sr., age 85, of 197 Old Dawson Road, Americus, Georgia. Mother Leotis Bryant Butts, age 89, of 225 Main Street, Leesburg, Georgia, died Saturday, February 11th at her residence in Leesburg, Georgia. The funeral service for Mother Leotis Bryant Butts, age 89, was held Friday, February 17th, of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Joseph Atkins officiated. The burial followed at the Mount Olive Church Cemetery in Warwick, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mr. Albert Butts Jr. of Valdosta, Georgia, Mr. Ernest Butts and his wife, Mrs. Willie Mae Butts, Mr. Charles Butts, and Mrs. Irene B. Williams, all of Leesburg, Georgia. Mr. James Butts and his wife, Mrs. Belinda Butts of Dawson, Georgia, and Miss Phyllis B. Hardy of Hampton, Georgia. 16 beloved grandchildren, 26 great-grandchildren, 1 great-grandchild, her loving, caring sisters, Mrs. Bertha Cummings and Mrs. Virginia Powell, both of Daytona Beach, Florida, Miss Dorothy Cobb of Americus, Georgia, and Miss Sarah Cobb of Chicago, Illinois. Her beloved brothers, Mr. Johnny Power of Daytona Beach, Florida, Mr. Tommy Power of Americus, Georgia, and the Reverend Arthur Cobb Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Ernestine Cobb of Ocala, Florida. Her beloved in-law, Miss Louise Burgess, Miss Jessie Mae Sanders, and her husband, Sir Clarence Sanders, Mrs. Lucinda Gordon, and Mrs. Melba Carter, all of Cordele, Georgia. A host of beloved nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mother Leotis Bryant Butts, age 89, of 225 Main Street, Leesburg, Georgia. United States Army veteran, Mr. Omar Brown, age 35, of 1305 West Waldale Avenue, Albany, Georgia, died Sunday, February 5th at the Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. The funeral service for United States Army veteran Mr. Jerry Omar Brown, age 35, was held Saturday, February 18, 2023, at the Monroe Comprehensive High School Auditorium in Albany, Georgia. The burial with military honors will be Tuesday, February 21st at 10 a.m. at the Andersonville National Cemetery in Andersonville, Georgia. Survivors include his loving wife, Mrs. Brittany Brown of Albany, Georgia, 4 loving children, Miss Trinity Brown, Miss Janine Brown, Miss Alasia Brown, all of Albany, Georgia, and Mr. Jerry Omar Brown, Jr. of Alabama. A bonus son, Mr. Tristan Graham of Douglasville, Georgia. His loving and devoted mother, Miss Rhonda Brown of Albany, Georgia. His beloved father, Mr. Jerry Britley of Albany, Georgia. His God-sent father, Mr. George Evans Jr., and his wife, Mrs. Tina Evans of all of Albany, Georgia. His beloved and devoted grandmother, Mrs. Bernice Johnson Brown of Albany, Georgia. 3 beloved brothers, Mr. Bellis Evans Sr. of Albany, Georgia, Mr. Jeremiah Jones and Mr. Jeremy Jones of Sylvester, Georgia. 3 bonus brothers, Mr. Dontavius Polite, Mr. Cornelius Evans, and Mr. James Stevens, all of Albany, Georgia. 7 beloved aunts, Dr. Rotunda Brown, Miss Ruby Britley, Miss Odessa Britley, Miss Prudy Brown, Miss Carol Britley, all of Albany, Georgia, Miss Minnie Britley of San Antonio, Texas, Miss Ethel Anthony and her husband, Mr. Charlie Anthony of Fort Walton, Florida. 4 God-sent aunts, Miss Raynetta Dukes of Atlanta, Georgia, Miss Shaana Scott of Douglasville, Georgia, Miss Davita Johnson of Smithville, Georgia, and Miss April LaGria of Albany, Georgia. 6 beloved uncles, Mr. Roosevelt Britley and his wife, Mrs. Maddie Britley, Mr. William Britley, Mr. Terry Britley, Mr. Michael Britley and his wife, Mrs. Raquel Britley, and Mr. Mark Britley and his wife, Mrs. Latasha Britley, all of Albany, Georgia. Mr. Bobby Britley of Leesburg, Georgia. A host of beloved nieces, nephews, great aunts, great uncles, other relatives, cousins, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. United States Army veteran, Mr. Jerry Omar Brown, age 35, of 1305 West Waldale Avenue, Albany, Georgia. Mr. Samuel James Maynor, age 62, of 1116 McClendon Court, Cordele, Georgia, died Thursday, February 9th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The memorial service for Mr. Samuel James Maynor, age 62, was held Saturday, February 18th in the chapel of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Ivory J. Corbin officiated. His beloved brother, the Reverend Nelson J. Maynor, pastor of the St. James Baptist Church and the Crossroad Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include his loving and caring mother, Mother May Frances Maynor, his beloved and caring children, Miss Keisha Gaston and her husband, Mr. Dennis Gaston, Mrs. Rayshonda McKeever and her husband, Mr. Reginald McKeever, all of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Samuel K. Maynor and his wife, Mrs. Tay Maynor of Morrow, Georgia, 9 beloved grandchildren, 1 great-grandchild, his beloved sisters, Miss Marilyn Williams and Mrs. Eddie Jean Brown and her husband, Mr. Johnny Brown, both of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Sarah Ann White of Warner Robins, Georgia. His beloved brothers, the Reverend Nelson J. Maynor and his wife, Mrs. Melinda Maynor of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Benny L. Maynor and his wife, Mrs. Brenda Maynor of Byron, Georgia, and Mr. Ernest L. Maynor and his wife, Mrs. Lorraine Maynor of Albany, Georgia. 2 beloved uncles, Mr. Freddie Pittman of Cordele, Georgia, and Mr. Eugene Pittman of Albany, Georgia. A host of beloved nieces and nephews, many cousins, to include 2 whom were raised as his brothers, Mr. Herman Harold Jackson of Cordele, Georgia, and Mr. Randolph Harold of Orlando, Florida. A host of other relatives and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Samuel James Maynor, age 62, of 1116 McClendon Court, Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Charlie James Anderson Sr., age 73, of 219 Peavy Street, Unadilla, Georgia, pastor of the New Mount Olive Baptist Church of Elko, Georgia, and the Old Mount Zion Baptist Church of Unadilla, Georgia, died Monday, February 13th at the Houston Medical Center in Warner Robins, Georgia. The funeral service for the Reverend Charlie James Anderson Sr., age 73, pastor of the New Mount Olive Baptist Church of Elko, Georgia, and the Old Mount Zion Baptist Church of Unadilla, Georgia, was held Saturday, February 19th on the grounds of his beloved Old Mount Zion Baptist Church in Unadilla, Georgia. The Reverend Rodney Duncan officiated. The burial followed at the Old Mount Zion Cemetery, Unadilla, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted children, Mrs. Stephanie Haggins and her husband, Mr. Wilmer Haggins of Atlanta, Georgia, and Deacon Charlie Anderson Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Keisha Anderson of Byron, Georgia. 8 beloved grandchildren, 7 great-grandchildren, his beloved sisters, Mrs. Mattie Page of Howard, New Jersey, and Mrs. Ruby Brown of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, his beloved brothers, Mr. Paul Anderson of Columbus, Georgia, and Mr. Adam Anderson of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, his sister-in-law, Mrs. Magnolia Gilmore of Fayetteville, Georgia, a brother-in-law, Mr. Archie Relaford Jr., and his wife, Mrs. Minnie Relaford of Albany, Georgia, a host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. The Reverend Charlie James Anderson Sr., age 73, of 219 Peavis Street, Unadilla, Georgia, and pastor of the New Mount Olive Baptist Church of Elko, Georgia, and the Old Mount Zion Baptist Church of Unadilla, Georgia. Again, the family of Mr. Monte K. Reed Jr. of Cordell, Georgia, the family of Deacon Johnny Lee Little Sr. of Americus, Georgia, the family of Mother Leodis Bryant Butts of Leesburg, Georgia, the family of United States Army veteran Mr. Jerry Omar Brown of Albany, Georgia, the family of Mr. Samuel James Maynard of Cordell, Georgia, the family of the Reverend Charlie James Anderson Sr. of Unadilla, Georgia, pastor of the New Mount Olive Baptist Church of Elko, Georgia, and the Old Mount Zion Baptist Church of Unadilla, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during the hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. May God bless each of you is their prayer. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordell and Vienna were in charge of each of these arrangements during the past week. And now, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Miss Trina M. Paul, age 52, of 317 Fish Hatchery Road, Cordell, Georgia, died Sunday, February 5th, at the South Georgia Medical Center in Valdosta, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Mr. Gary Sistromp of Cordell, Georgia, her beloved children, Mr. Gary Sistromp Jr., Miss Jaquera Sistromp, and Mr. Gary Brown, all of West Palm Beach, Florida. Her loving sibling, Mr. Tracy Paul, and his companion, Miss Yvonne Kennedy, and Mr. Rodney Paul, both of Cordell, Georgia, Mr. Corey Paul and his wife, Mrs. Melissa Paul of South Carolina, the Reverend Keith Lewis and his wife, Mrs. Larissa Lewis of Vienna, Georgia, Miss Sheila Sweeney of Perry, Georgia, Mrs. Kimberly Street Brinson of Cordell, Georgia, Mr. Lafayette Street and his wife, Mrs. Sherrill Street of Nashville, Tennessee, and Miss Makita Brown of Beale Air Force Base, California. Mr. Mashon Brown of Cordell, Georgia, Mr. James Graham of Statesburg, Georgia, the children she helped rear, Mrs. Katia Paul Miss Asia Lofton, both of Warner Robins, Georgia, Mr. Tristan Paul, and Mr. Courtney Johnson, Mr. Sam Sneed, all of Cordele, Georgia, her beloved aunts and uncles, Miss Dorothy Paul, Miss Mary Arner and her husband, Mr. Governor Arner, and Miss Annette Putman, all of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Martha Williams of Warner Robins, Georgia, Miss Rose Mary Street Brock and her husband, Mr. James Brock of Atlanta, Georgia, and Mr. Fred Paul of Drayton, Georgia. A host of beloved nieces and nephews to include Miss LaQuasia Paul and Miss Antoinette Johnson, a host of cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Miss Trina M. Paul, age 52, of 317 Fish Hatchery Road, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Trina M. Paul, age 52, will be held today, Sunday, February 19, at 11 a.m., graveside at the Macedonia Baptist Church Cemetery, Drayton Community, Vienna, Georgia. The Reverend Eddie Tarbert will officiate. Miss Elizabeth Adams, age 40, of Warner Robins, Georgia, died Wednesday, February 8th at the Dormany Medical Center in Fitzgerald, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and caring daughter, Miss Isabella Adams, her beloved sisters, Miss Barbara Hardy and Miss Mary Adams, both of Warner Robins, Georgia. Her beloved nieces and nephews, Mr. Jonathan Adams, Mr. William Moore, Mrs. Michelle Moore, Miss Malia Moore, Mr. Quentin Moore, Mr. Alexander Adams, Miss Victoria Adams, Mr. Shanturia Hardy, Miss Shaquilla Hardy, and Miss Shanice Adams, a host of beloved cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Miss Elizabeth Adams, age 40, of Warner Robins, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Elizabeth Adams, age 40, will be held private. The Reverend Johnny B. Dean, pastor of the New Poplar Springs Baptist Church of Byronville, Georgia, will officiate. Mr. Calvin B. Johnson Sr., better known as Peanut, age 40, of 1206 East Blue Lane, Cordele, Georgia, died Thursday, January 26, at the Chris Regional Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and caring children, Miss Shateria Holmes of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Calvin B. Johnson Jr., Mr. Caleb Johnson, both of Albany, Georgia, his beloved father, Mr. Samuel McKenzie of Cordele, Georgia, a beloved brother, Mr. Alvin B. Johnson Sr., and his wife, Mrs. Crystal Johnson of Columbus, Georgia. His loving and devoted aunt, Mrs. Mary Lango Smith of Cordele, Georgia, a beloved and devoted cousin, Deacon Terry Lango, and his wife, Mrs. Wanjika Lango of Cordele, Georgia. A host of beloved cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Calvin B. Johnson Sr., better known as Peanut, age 40, of 1206 East Blue Lane, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Calvin B. Johnson, better known as Peanut, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordele and Vienna, are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Friends, that conclude our funeral notices for this morning. And as always, we do remind you concerning our pre-funeral arrangements planning available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, with packages available with a single pay, a 3-year pay, and a 5-year pay. So please stop by and talk with us concerning your pre-funeral arrangements needs available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. And also whole life insurance is available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
That ain't gonna blow up on you. I done it too many times.
And now for announcements. The House of God Church, located 602 West 19th Avenue, Cordial Black History Program will be held Sunday, February 26th at 12 o'clock noon. Councilwoman Kalisha Newsom of Willacoochee, Georgia, will be the guest speaker. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Deaconess Beatrice Mercer is the hostess. Deacon Almond Moore is chairman of deacons. Elder Edward Harris is the pastor. The Greater Mars Tabernacle Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them with worship service beginning at Sunday school begins at 9 o'clock a.m., worship service at 9:30 a.m. The Greater Mars Tabernacle Baptist Church conference call schedule is as follows. Tuesday, midday prayer conference at 12 o'clock noon. Thursday, prayer meeting and Bible study at 6 o'clock p.m. The call-in number for the conference call is 229-329-7611. Deacon Arthur L. Parker, chairman of deacons. Reverend Dr. K.M. Williams is the pastor. The St. King Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them during their morning worship service, which begins at 10:15 a.m. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Reverend Woody Burnham is the pastor. The Mount Zion First African Baptist Church conference call scheduled Sunday morning at 10 o'clock a.m., prayer Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 o'clock noon. Bible study is held each Wednesday at 5 o'clock p.m. The call-in number is 339-209-6419. Deacon Joe Wedges, chairman of deacons. Reverend Dr. Dan James III is the pastor. The Yosemite Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them this morning during their 10:30 a.m. morning worship service. Mother Mary S. Butler is the church mother. Deacon Johnny Wilson is the chairman of deacons. Reverend Cecil Strauder is the pastor. The New Oak Grove Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them each Sunday. Sunday school begins at 9:15 a.m., worship service at 10 o'clock a.m. Face covering is required. Deacon Alonzo Jones, chairman of deacons. Reverend W.W. Wilson is the pastor. The Beautiful Zion Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them today at 11 o'clock a.m. Mother Grace Patrick Church mother, Reverend Lorinda Ray, is the pastor. Everyone has a cordial invitation to worship at the Mount Calvary Baptist Church today. Sunday school begins at 9:45 a.m., morning worship service at 10:30 a.m. Mother Evelyn Lewis, church mother. Deacon Leon Spears, chairman of deacons. Reverend Isaac Owens is the pastor. There will be a benefit program for Sister Melissa Hightower on Sunday, February 26th at 2:30 p.m. at the Union Oak Grove Baptist Church in Andersonville, Georgia. For more information, please contact Ms. V. Griffin at 229-924-8340. 229-924-8340, or Mrs. Berta Hicks at 229-924-9577, 229-924-9577. Deacon Joseph Arnett is the chairman of Deacons. Reverend William Edwards is the host pastor. The New Corinth Baptist Church of Leslie, Georgia invites everyone to worship with them each third Sunday beginning at 10 o'clock a.m. Reverend Carl Smith is the pastor. The McAfee Grove Baptist Church of Leesburg invites everyone to worship with them family nights on Tuesday at 7 o'clock p.m., small class study Thursdays at 7 p.m., Sunday morning worship at 9 o'clock a.m., and you may join them using the call numbers 425-436-6341. The access code is 708058. Reverend Dr. Robert L. Morgan Sr. is the pastor. The Crisp County School System will host a job fair to recruit potential candidates for employment. The job fair will be held Saturday, February 25th at the Crisp County Middle School, 332 Old Hatley Road, Cordele, Georgia, from 10 a.m. until 2 o'clock p.m. For more information and registration, please contact the Crisp County Board of Education by calling 229-276-3400, 229-276-3400. The Crisp County High School class of 1978 will have a meeting on Saturday, February 25th at Blackshear Place. The meeting will begin at 2 o'clock p.m. All class members are asked to attend this to prepare for the 45th class reunion. For more information, please contact Mrs. Linda Rogers at 229-322-5976. 229-322-5976, or Reverend Johnny B. Dean at 229-712-0078, 229-712-0078. The Crisp County Pre-K registration for 2023 and 2024 will be on Wednesday, March 8th at Pre-K location located at 802 East 24th Avenue from 8:30 a.m. until 4 o'clock p.m. For more information, please contact Ms. Jane Ramsey at 229-276-3410, 229-276-3410. Brother Norris Mathis's 16th Gospel Anniversary will be held on Sunday, February 26th at the A.S. Clark Medical Institute in Cordele. Our program will be the Gospel Travelers of Oakfield, Georgia, the Gospel Pioneers of Vienna, Georgia, the Gospel Stars of Lilly, Georgia, Blessed and Highly Favored of Warner Robins, Georgia, the New Silver Stars of Macon, Georgia, Bubba and the Thioneers. Doors will open at 3 o'clock p.m. The program starts at 4 o'clock p.m. Everyone attending is asked to wear a mask. Mrs. Fanny Pittman and Mrs. Pinky Powers a Day is asking for donations to help with the annual cleaning costs of Hartshell Cemetery. For more information, please call Mrs. Pittman at 229-405-4358, 229-405-4358, or Mrs. Ade at 817-489-8126. 817-489-8126. Kitty's Corner Daycare Center of Cordele King and Queen pageant will be on Friday, February 24th at 6 o'clock p.m. For more information, please contact Ms. Freddie Lewis at 229-699-2394, 229-699-2394. Mrs. Linda Faye Marlin will be feeding the homeless every fourth Sunday of each month from 2 until 4 p.m. For delivery or more information, please call 229-401-8868, 229-401-8868. The Wilcox County Head Start is offering free child development services for eligible families with children between the ages of 3 and 5. For more information, please contact Mrs. Donna Jenkins at 229-365-2341 or 478-922 4464. The New Poplar Spring Baptist Church, Byronville, Georgia, Black History Program will be Sunday, February 26th at 9:45 a.m. Mrs. Patricia Williams of Cordele will be the guest speaker. Pastor Johnny Dean, pastor. The Bethlehem Baptist Church Dueling Family and Friends Day service will be on Sunday, February 26th at 11 o'clock a.m. Special guest will be the Dougherty County Comprehensive High School Gospel Chorale. Reverend Jerry J. Sanders is the pastor. The Evergreen Baptist Church will celebrate the 41st pastor anniversary of Reverend David Thomas Sr. on Sunday, February 26th at 11 o'clock a.m. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Sister Bertha Lou Thomas, Secretary, Deacon John David Law, Chairman of Deacons, Reverend David Thomas Sr. is the pastor. That concludes our announcements for this morning.
And now for dedication. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: in loving memory of Mrs. Maggie Lean Carter, who would have celebrated her birthday February 3rd. Dedication requested by her children, Mrs. Martha Ruth Westbrook, Mrs. Willie Mae Leary, Miss Mitt Redding, Mr. William Carter, and Mrs. Catherine Carter, Miss Linda Carter, all of the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the entire family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of United States Army veteran, the Reverend Walter Carter, who departed this life February 4th, 1975. Dedication requested by his beloved children, Mrs. Martha Ruth Westbrook, Mrs. Willie Mae Leary, Miss Mitt Redding, Mr. William and Miss Catherine Carter, and Miss Linda Carter, and the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the entire family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mr. Robert Lee Coley Jr., who departed this life February 7th, 2014. Dedication requested by his beloved wife, Mrs. Loretha Jones Coley, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Miss Kimberly Adams, who departed this life February 7, 2015. Dedication requested by the Adams, Hardeman, and Cobb family. Precious memory lingers still. In loving memory of Mrs. Rondalyn Wright West, who would have celebrated her birthday February 9th. Dedication requested by the entire family. In loving memory of our beloved Deacon Jewel Cross, who would have celebrated his birthday February 10th. Dedication comes from his beloved wife, Deaconess Martha A. Cross, the children, and the entire family, and all of the members of the Greater Marsh Tabernacle Baptist Church's pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, Deacon Tommy Ford, and the entire membership. In loving memory of Mrs. Mary Fagan Thomas, who would have celebrated her birthday February 11th. Dedication requested by our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the entire family. In loving memory of retired educator Ms. Catherine James of Vienna, Georgia, who departed this life February 11, 2005. Dedication requested by the entire family and the staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mr. Bobby Lee Johnson, who would have celebrated his birthday February 11th. Dedication requested by his beloved mother, Mrs. Annette Stembridge, and family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of retired educator Mrs. Ida Rose Oliver, who would have celebrated her birthday February 11th. Dedication requested by her children, grandchildren, and the entire family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mr. Andre Bivens Haywood, who would have celebrated his birthday February 13th. Dedication requested by his beloved grandmother, Mother Lenora McNeil, and the entire family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory, Mrs. Bernice Kellogg, who would have celebrated her birthday February 13th. Dedication requested by her children, grandchildren, the Rees, and Kellogg family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mr. Howard Jones II, who departed this life February 14, 1976. Dedication requested by the Jones family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Charlotte Yah, who departed this life February 14, 1999. Dedication requested by the Yah family. In loving memory of Mrs. Willie Bright Childs, who departed this life February 14, 1992. Dedication requested by the family. In loving memory of Mrs. Ethel Fuller, who would have celebrated her birthday February 15th. Dedication requested by the entire family. In loving memory of Mrs. Bessie M. Lawson, who would have celebrated her birthday February 15th. Dedication requested by Gail, Johnny, and Janae Ingram and the entire family. In loving memory of Mr. Byron Neil Westbrook, who would have celebrated his birthday February 15th. Dedication requested by his beloved mother, Mrs. Martha Ruth Westbrook, and the entire family. In loving memory of Mrs. Shirley McClendon Thompson, who departed this life February 15, 1993, dedication requested by the entire family. In loving memory of Mother Willie Eva Talbert, who would have celebrated her birthday February 17, dedication requested by the entire Talbert family and the members of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church of Pastor Dr. K.M. Williams and Deacon Tommy Ford Jr. In loving memory of Mother Lucille Shazer, who would have celebrated her birthday February 18, dedication requested by her beloved family and the members of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church. In loving memory of Deaconess Candace Everett, who would have celebrated her birthday February 18, dedication requested by her beloved family and the members of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church of Pastor Dr. K.M. Williams and Deacon Tommy Ford Jr. In loving memory of Mrs. Lenny Toots, who departed this life February 18, 2016, dedication requested by the Toots family and the Gethsemane Missionary Baptist Church family. In loving memory of Mrs. Brenda Kellogg Hicks, who departed this life February 18, 2017, dedication requested by the Kellogg family. In loving memory of retired educator Mrs. Carolyn Renee Brooks, who departed this life February 18, 2022, dedication requested by her beloved mother, Deaconess Carrie Brooks, and the entire family. In loving memory of Mr. Billy Joe Fagan, who departed this life February 20th, 1996, dedication requested by the Fagan family, each one gone but not forgotten. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following. Happy anniversary to Mr. Kenneth and Miss Gloria Armstrong, who celebrated their anniversary Tuesday, February 14th. Dedication requested by the Armstrong family. Happy 16th anniversary to Mr. Rico and Miss Angela Dempsey, who celebrated their anniversary Thursday, February 16th. Dedication requested by Miss Vernell Butts and the entire family. Special anniversary wish goes out. Happy 50th wedding anniversary to the Reverend Ivory Corbin and Sister Dorothy Corbin, who celebrated their anniversary Friday, February 17, and also happy birthday to the Reverend Ivory Corbin, who celebrated his birthday Monday, February 13. Dedication requested by his entire family, the members of the Mount Moriah Baptist Church and the Niles Chapel Baptist Church. Happy 50th anniversary to the Reverend Ivory Corbin and Sister Dorothy Corbin. God continue to bless each of you, your unions, and keep it strong. Our first selection this morning goes out to the following. Happy birthday to Miss Keisha Johnson, who will celebrate her birthday Wednesday, February 8th. Happy birthday to Miss Calandra Jones, who celebrated her birthday Thursday, February 9th. Happy birthday to Miss Jackie Smith, who celebrated her birthday Friday, February 10th. Happy birthday to Miss Sabrina Shivers, who celebrated her birthday Friday, February 10th. Happy birthday to Miss Chantel Jones, who celebrated her birthday Saturday, February 11th. Happy birthday to Miss Donna Cobb, who celebrated her birthday Saturday, February 11th. Happy birthday to missionary Clemmy Fullwood Jones, who celebrated her birthday Saturday, February 11th. Happy birthday to Mrs. Helen Ford, who celebrated her birthday Saturday, February 11th. Happy birthday to Minister Gloria Westbrook Mathis, who celebrated her birthday Monday, February 13th. Happy birthday to Miss Tina Redding, who celebrated her birthday Monday, February 13th. Happy birthday to Miss Asia Felton. Happy 16th birthday to Miss Asia Felton, who celebrated her birthday Thursday, February 16th. Happy birthday to Mr. Reginald Armstrong, who celebrated his birthday, February 16th. Happy birthday to Miss Claudette Armstrong, who celebrated her birthday, February 18th. Happy birthday to Miss Beulah Morgan, who celebrated her birthday Friday, February 17th. Happy birthday to Miss Ruby Daniels, who celebrated her birthday on February 19th. That's today. Happy birthday. And happy birthday to Pastor Cynthia McCrae Boone, who's celebrating her birthday today, February 19th. And happy birthday to Mr. Ernest Trice, also known as Boot, who is celebrating his birthday today, February 19th. It is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcement. Miss Trina M. Paul, age 52, of 317 Fish Hatchery Road, Cordele, Georgia, died Sunday, February 5th at the South Georgia Medical Center in Valdosta, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Trina M. Paul, age 52, will be held today, Sunday, February 19th at 11 a.m. at the Macedonia Baptist Church Cemetery, Drayton Community, Vienna, Georgia. The Reverend Eddie Talbert will officiate. Miss Elizabeth Adams, age 40, of 546 Marion Way, Warner Robins, Georgia, died Wednesday, February 8th at the Darmody Medical Center in Fitzgerald, Georgia. The funeral service for Ms. Elizabeth Adams will be private to invited family and friends only. The Reverend Johnny B. Dean, pastor of the New Poplar Springs Baptist Church of Byronville, Georgia, will officiate. Mr. Calvin B. Johnson, Sr., better known as Peanut, age 40, of 1206 East Blue Lane, Cordele, Georgia, died Thursday, January 6th at the Chris Regional Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Calvin B. Johnson, Sr., better known as Peanut, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Our selection this morning is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones were laid to rest during the past week. The family of Mr. Monte K. Reed Jr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Deacon Johnny Lee Little Sr. of Americus, Georgia. The family of Mother Leotis Bryant Butts of Leesburg, Georgia. The family of United States Army veteran Mr. Jerry O'Mark Brown of Albany, Georgia. The family of Mr. Samuel James Maynor of Cordele, Georgia. The family of the Reverend Charlie James Anderson Sr. of Unadilla, Georgia, pastor of the New Mount Olive Baptist Church of Elko, Georgia, and the Old Mount Zion Baptist Church of Unadilla, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones will be laid to rest during this week. The family Miss Trina M. Paul of Cordele, Georgia. The family Miss Elizabeth Adams of Warner Robins, Georgia. The family Mr. Calvin B. Johnson of Cordele, Georgia. This election is dedicated to all of the sick and shut-in, to all patients in the local and surrounding hospitals, nursing homes, and rehabilitation centers, to our beloved ministers and their devoted family members, to all retired educators, to the men and women serving in our armed forces, both stateside and abroad, to all veterans, and to everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. Our program goes out in memory of our past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. This election goes out to my wife, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, to my son, Jai Wilkerson Parker. This election goes out to my mother-in-law, Mrs. Billy Ann Hall and family, to my brother, retired Chief Master Sergeant Norman F. Dexter, was the guest speaker of the Deacon and Deaconess anniversary of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church this past Sunday. Did a beautiful job there. God bless you. To his wife, Dr. Maxine Gwendolyn Maxine Dexter, and their grandson Noble. This selection goes out to my sister, Mrs. Patsy Jackson, her husband, Mr. Jim Jackson of Cordele, Georgia. To my nephew, Deacon Kenneth Smith, program chairman of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church, and our pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, pastor of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church and moderator of the Gum Creek Missionary Baptist Association. This election goes out again to each and every one who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. My cousin, Deacon Emery Wright, and the entire Wright family of Leesburg and Albany, Georgia. To Deacon and Mrs. Frank Mays and family of Lee County, Georgia, my first cousin there, and to each and every one. Mr. Cleveland R. Lemon, oldest staff member of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home and steward of the Bethel CME Church here in Cordele, Georgia. To our beloved Mrs. Easter May Sanders and family. This election goes out to Mr. Roscoe Applin and family, Mr. and Mrs. Willie Frank Collier and family, Mr. Gus Williams and family, Mrs. Marion Felton and family, Deacon Lonnie Hoggebrook and family, Miss Sharon Chambliss and family, Mrs. Francis Chambliss and family, Miss Verdell Butts and family, Mr. James Grant and family, Mrs. Curtine Grant and family, Miss Debbie Reed and family, Miss Stephanie Grant and family, Mother Grace Patrick and family, Mr. and Mrs. Jimmy Passmore and family, Miss Denise Walker and family, the family of the late Mr. Eddie Hester of Pineview, Georgia, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Kerr and family, Mr. and Mrs. Joshua Woodson and family, Miss Bernice Smith and family, Chairman Deacon and Mrs. Sammy McGill and family, Mayor Juanita Kitchen and family, Mr. and Mrs. Deacon and Mrs. Charles Glenn and family, Deacon and Mrs. Charlie Westbrook and family, the family of the late Miss Cornelius Jackson, Mr. and Mrs. Dwight Tennant and family, Miss Sue James and family, Miss Joanne Atkins and family, Miss Faustine Carruthers and family, Mrs. Linda Wilson and family, Mrs. Donald Cobb and family, the Reverend Jimmy Felton, entire Felton family, Miss B.J. Ezel and the entire staff of BJ's Diner, our final selection for this morning.
Everybody ought to know Oh, that will keep my wings. Oh, child.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed our program. Tune in again on next Sunday morning. In your time of need, contact the competent, capable, and dependable staff at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
Oh, some of these days. Well, I'm going to walk up and take up my stand.
African attire.